Know a little bit more about what life was like for my mother. Um, Obviously, you did not know her, but what could her? I had heard that she was in a convent, placed in a convent with her sister Elsie for safekeeping, and she was schooled there. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I know nothing at all about that. This is slightly contradictory to the only information that I have about your grandfather, namely that he was manager of an oil plant in Zniesienie, which actually is just a industrial suburb or part of Lvov or Lemberg, and that he died of a throat disease and his progeny was scattered over the world. But I had calculated that it must have been as they were married in 1896. This must reasonably have been some time at the time or after the First World War. And and then this information that the children, I guess he died, and the children were taken care of taking care of the nuns. I'm having difficulties understanding what happened there. For me, I don't know much about those times, but it sounds very
Is it a possibility? Is it a
unconventional that
Oh.
probably most probably Catholic nuns would be taking care of children, Jewish children from Jewish family.
I think they
It's
hid the two of them.
they, but what did they hid them from?
My understanding was from the pogroms,
And there was so much
but
anti-Semitism.
the boys did not go. The boys stayed with an aunt and uncle after Anna and Yitzhak had died.
Uh,
I heard they were killed, but
the question was were those. I mean, there were occasional pogroms in Poland after the First World War, and there were pogroms during the Austrian times. I would have, all this is new to me. I would have checked when were there pogroms involved, which years were
and
they?
also the journal that I shared with you today.
Yes.
My grandmother's journal was 1918.
1918. So
Which is
obviously they were still
after
going
the end
to
of
school.
World War
Yes. Yes.
So this must have been after 1918. So
That
this-
sounded like a graduation journal. And we used to call it autograph books.
Yes, this is an autograph book that would be typical, particularly for girls 16, 17 years old, to have inscriptions made in by relatives and girlfriends and so on. So I will have to check when the pogroms were in Lvov, as I know that there were some. Which years was that? And whether there were any French nuns convent involved.
I'm going to interject now and talk about something very current, and that is Yurick as I know him and what I have learned about him in these 4 years from these wonderful emails that we exchanged. And I think I told you, Yurick, that I was a little nervous about meeting you because we had such a wonderful correspondence. And I thought, oh my God, when we finally meet, will he be disappointed in me? And it's going to be, I was a little concerned about that, but I'm okay with that.
You are not
now.
worried then, okay?
No. But I want to ask you, you're a man of many tastes and interests, and I admire that tremendously. You love the theater, and you love music, and you love ballet, and you swim, and you ski, and you sail.
And
my
then I
God.
ski some more.
So now you came to this country with your family, and New York is an exciting place. I want to ask you, what draws you to this country? What do you like particularly about coming here?
there is a lot of things, and New York is so incredibly rich in culture and cuisine and everything else. So it's so exciting to be here, and our children love to be here. When we ask them, okay, so when do you want to go to the United States? Choose one place where you want to say New York. But the main reason for our coming here now is that we have you here. We have never met personally before. We have Herbert and Annabelle here. We have my mother's cousin and her husband living in Manhattan, who are in their 80s.
Oh.
And we have a wonderful Uncle Louis, who is, I think, 2 months Herbert Sr., who lives in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, is
And
that
we
that's what
wanted-
you visited?
We wanted to see the 5 of you.
And how old is he?
He is 91.
Oh, my goodness.
So there were many reasons, but the main reason was to come here, to see you, to have you meet our children, and to spend time with you, which I am so happy about being able to do.
And Jason, is there anything that you would like to add?
It's
Come sit here.
all right, I'll switch. This is pretty remarkable that we're able to do this. You don't really know where you're going when you do this sort of research. It's sort of an intellectual pursuit of how far down this tree can I go, how many people can I add, and how can I verify this very shoddy information, it's very sparse sort of information, and the data's always a challenge. It's like a detective sort of work, and it was sort of like you don't really know what you're going to find. You just got to start. But after sort of making that connection, I said, "Oh wow, I have to tell Isabel," and you don't really know how much of an impact that can have until you realize that it's evolving beyond just the name on a tree. This is a real person, and
And I'm your grandma.
and Isabel's my grandmother, and to see that this has become such a great relationship has made me really happy that I was doing this. But it was, when I started doing genealogical research years ago, I never thought, my grandma could really use a new friend. That was, it's an extraordinary outcome that nobody could have predicted.
Do you feel any personal connection to any of this other than me? Your ancestors,
Yeah.
do you read what Jörg has sent us and say, oh, I recognize that, maybe I'm part of this family, or maybe I am who I am because of all this genealogy?
It's amazing to see. There's the past tense of these people, and you feel the closeness when you hear the stories. That these are the people that had these stories, that had these children who are my ancestors, and there's something really nice in terms of a feeling that you get when you think about that as your heritage. And then there's the current events of it, which is look at where we are today with this set of lineages and look at the similarities. Look at what accomplishments we see. Look, like there's a lot of engineers around, there's a lot of intellectual types around, and
Wow!
it's like a pervasive sort of
Beautiful ladies.
and beautiful ladies. There's a pervasive sort of theme here where we have similar values, and it strikes me as interesting both from the historical perspective, because it's a history, but it's a personal history. It's not just the generic history, but also the current. You can observe how a family that, even though they hadn't been, personally in touch, they developed similar values through the common ancestors, perhaps. Yeah.
How far back do you think we could go? Family tree.
I don't know. Realistically,
End of 18th century. On my mother's side, the oldest date that I have is 1759. On my father's side, I'm not sure, but somewhere around 1800,
Yeah.
1790. And beyond that, there weren't even any family names.
right.
They were introduced in 1770s.
Exactly, and that's consistent with what I've seen. There's the records get inconsistent in terms of the spelling of somebody's name, and you can always sort of make a connection, but it becomes a more probabilistic thing where you can't quite be sure how much of that there is a connection you can probably see, but whether that person's a sister or mother becomes harder to figure out.
Of course, we are all descended from Abraham, but the problem is we don't know exactly how. There is a gap, but
Where we have branched
Jason and
off.
I are working on it, and we'll whatever we find. I want to add something. Why did my parents stay in Poland? I mean, we have been talking here repeatedly about the value of family reunions and, keeping the contacts with your family. I have been asking myself this question for 50, 60
And I
years
ask
now.
that of you.
Yes, exactly. And the answer is I don't know. And I have gone through all the possible potential answers. My parents were as far from sympathizing with any leftist, communist, socialist ideologies as you can imagine. Why am I saying that? There were many Jews who stayed on in Poland among those who survived because they thought that now, finally, the first time in the history of humanity, we will have a fair society that is fair to everybody, including the Jews. Of course, they didn't know that they would be terribly disappointed. But my parents were never there. They were